Sure, and what a 10 years it's been. Let's try and make sense of this moment and bring in our guests. Themba Godi is the former head of the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, that's SCOPA. Also joining us is political analyst Sandile Swana. And rounding off our panel this morning is Duvenage, who is, of course, with the organization Undoing Tax Abuse. To all three of our guests, it's lovely to have you on the program. Thanks very much indeed for making time. And you know, as coincidence would have it, the former president is still in the news, of course, on a completely different issue, and is currently sitting in the electoral court in Bloemfontein. But I suppose that really speaks to just the kind of 10 years we've had. And Sandile Swana, if I can begin with you, depending who you ask, people look back at this particular report as being a seminal moment in our political trajectory. And I wonder to what extent you agree with that.
Yeah, I do agree with that, because this was one of the crucial moments in challenging impunity, where the abuse of power and the belief that the ANC would govern forever as a majority until Jesus comes back was being challenged, and challenged decisively. It took long, and it has not yet been finalized. The other thing was that it challenged this idea of majoritarianism, that anything that is approved by a majority party is automatically correct. A tendency that continues till today, as we saw in the hiding of the Phala matter by the majority, the ANC majority in parliament. So it was a start, indeed a decisive start. And as we see now, the ANC in its decline and headed for the exit door.
Yeah, it was a almost 450-page document and was scathing of not only the former president, but some of his ministers and Parliament as well. And Themba Godi, you were head of SCOPA at the time, SCOPA, of course, being a watchdog in Parliament. I wonder, in your own reflections, what you reckon were some of the challenges in ensuring that at least what is laid out in the form of recommendations in this report is in fact implemented in a context where there was a view, still is depending who you ask, that MPs will always toe the party line.
No, indeed. And I think one of the outcomes from this report was a move by SCOPA to have the rules of parliament changed, to read that any report that deals with public expenditure should be referred to the Standing Committee on Public Accounts, because up until then, the rules say that SCOPA can only deal with reports of the Auditor General, and the reports of the Public Protector required the setting up of a special committee. And I think that is why you had that ad hoc committee chaired by Mr. Cedric Frolic, because we realized that when you have an ad hoc committee on such matters, it becomes more political than being focused on the issues at hand, which were very clear in that report in terms of what the Public Protector had identified as challenges and the remedial action that she sought done. You ended up having a lot of politics away from the simple facts in that report.
Yeah, and you know, these are facts that ironically even senior members of the ANC are now looking back at and conceding, right? Who can never forget Fikile Mbalula, who's now the Secretary General, admitting, quite frankly, that the organization went out of its way to protect the former president at the time. And it's going to raise all kinds of questions, Duvenage, about whether or not we feel we're at a place now where, frankly, we can prevent a repeat of what took place all those years ago. How confident are you that, in fact, we have walked enough of the journey to be able to hold any leader, quite frankly, no less the leader of the ANC, accountable for whatever they might have done?
Yeah, hi. I'm not so sure we're there yet. As Sandile said, recent events with Phala shows that protection of the people in power who abuse that power remains. Maybe things will change after these forthcoming elections, and maybe power that is shared is not going to open those doors. But without doubt, the ramifications of state capture that continues to this day, more so in local government than ever before, but throughout the public sector, continues unabated, and it really is a concern. But certainly the Nkandla matter was the big one that that opened the door on the country's eyes to this abuse of power and this gross spending with no consequences. And I think it was the start of the downfall of Jacob Zuma. But I guess as you see things unfolding right now, politicians live on to fight another day, and that's what's unfolding right now. Yeah. And it is sad that we have somebody of his stature and that the type of conduct that has continued for years allowed to continue in the way it is unfolding, and possibly even entering the halls of Parliament again. It really is sad.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can almost hear some of Jacob Zuma's supporters, some of them gathered outside court now, vehemently disagreeing with you. And I suppose part of what they'll cite, Sandile Swana, is this idea that despite everything that's been said in this report, there hasn't really been any kind of formal and successful prosecution, at least in relation to the former president, if memory serves. And that's going to raise all kinds of questions about what accountability looks like. If this was such a seminal moment, why is it that we don't seem to have much to point to when it comes to holding people accountable for, frankly, what now appears to be lies?
Yes, I think that as I looked at the records, I mean, the last court case that was claiming the 155 million from Nkandla Report, the architect that Zuma actually appointed himself. The last records show that they went to court around 2021, and after that, I think they needed to take a default judgment against him, and there's no record that the default judgment was ever taken. Maybe other people have better information than that. But on the part of Jacob Zuma himself, he appointed contractors, including the chief architect, illegally. Civil engineer, contractor, and so on, illegally, totally illegally. And there is no accountability of anybody who acted on those instructions and on Jacob Zuma, who issued those instructions. And on top of that, the original budget was about 27 million. At the end of the day, they spent 246 million, totally unjustified. And the people who allowed that expansion of that budget have not been held accountable, several, including the various ministers, including the very Nathi Nhleko, who we are told that he was telling lies, wayethetha ubuxoki, that he has not been held accountable through all possible avenues. So all of those things must still unfold, and we hope that the new government that will be elected on the 29th of May will follow up on those issues, because we need to be patient and pursue these matters to their logical conclusion, even if it takes 50 years.
You really think they'll do that? I mean, you really think the next administration will, given what's taken place, even just in the past 5 years, will go back to the Nkandla matter?
The thing about it, as you know, that in the Xhosa or Zulu language, they say that ityala aliboli. So a court, for instance, Nkandla's case is in court. It cannot just expire out of the blue. And if you have violated the PFMA and the Preferential Procurement Act in the manner that you have, in fact, violated the Constitution, because I think it's Section 217 that deals with these irregular procurements, it cannot just say that those cases have expired. And struggle for justice takes long. I mean, my grandfather was in the struggle in his own way, my father and myself. It took more than 3 generations to get the democracy. So we need to be patient to fight impunity to its logical conclusion, no matter how many generations it takes.
Sure, you know, and I have to...
Zuma and company who are implicated must account.
Sure. As you say that, I must confess that we're watching a number of developing stories, and I might have to abruptly interrupt one of you at some stage because there's movement finally in the electoral court, another matter with the former president arguably at the heart of it. But I digress. If we are to, once again, just, there are those live visuals, by the way, just for the benefit of our viewers, the legal counsel for the former president's party, I should say, the MK party, finally taking their seats. And you can just see there within the shots, the former president himself engaging Dalimpofu SC, who of course is leading the legal team representing the MK party. At the center of this, of course, the ANC's bid to try and undo, if you like, the registration of the MK party as a political party with the IEC. And we'll see, of course, how all of that unfolds as soon as proceedings begin. But once again, let's continue with our discussion just to, I suppose, notify you about that. Themba Godi, your role as the head of SCOPA at the time, I think, came with its own responsibilities. Many organizations will claim that they made the most noise about this before there was any kind of, let's call it, consensus that something was horribly wrong, including the DA, who at the time actually asked for Parliament to institute its own investigation around what happened. My understanding is that you didn't necessarily go down that route. And I wonder, with the benefit of hindsight, whether there are any regrets insofar as that is concerned.
Well, like I indicated before, in terms of the rules of Parliament, SCOPA had to deal only with the reports of the Auditor General. The reports of the Public Protector were referred to a special subcommittee. That is why you had that subcommittee headed by Cedric Frolic. And as a consequence of this report, we pushed for the rules to be changed to say that any report on public financial expenditure must be referred to SCOPA, because like I said, in SCOPA, we focused on the facts and not the politics. But there was more politics on this matter than focusing on the facts, because as you heard in that clip when the then head of the Constitutional Court was passing a judgment, the issue was there were certain provisions that were outside security concerns that should be paid back for. There was this issue around inflation of prices for which action needed to be taken against certain contractors. And for me, that's where it is limited to, of course, irregular appointment of contractors and all that. Those are very clearly defined things away from the politics and the noise that followed. And if these were referred to SCOPA, it could have been handled much, much differently. And of course, the issue around majoritarianism and how it would have played out, that's another issue, as we've seen with the current president, whether it's Phala, whether it is that leaked audio where he spoke about his knowledge of people who are abusing money, whether you're talking about Marcus Jooste, it has always been that those who are rich and powerful would always have their way out of trouble vis-a-vis an ordinary person in the street.
Sure. And I suppose there's that old age saying about the more things changing and the more they stay the same, Wayne, because, I mean, 10 years down the line, one would have hoped that we'll be able to speak about real lessons that have been learned in order to ensure that at the very least there isn't a repeat of what's happened, which, by the way, is something that this report actually alluded to, that part of the work that now needs to be done is to ensure that we're not back here again. But Themba Godi, Sandile, Swana, all citing so many poignant examples that point us to the fact that, quite frankly, we may have not moved as much as we thought we would have a decade later.
Yeah, we haven't, quite frankly, and I think it's getting worse in many respects when we see the extent of the plundering and the abuse of power that is taking place without any consequences. But fortunately, digital fingerprints and all the evidence lives on, and hopefully we can come back to many of these matters and hold people to account. As we've heard, I mean, the price that we paid, or that we, yes, because we, the citizens, paid of nearly R250 billion. Think about it in those terms, R250 billion for an upgrade to a president's house, and he paid back less than 8 million rand under duress. The prices of what was supposed to take place was almost tenfold, and this escalation and procurement irregularities that takes place continuously is happening right now. We see it unfolding and trying to push into place car power ships and nuclear deals that are going out for requests for proposals. It just really doesn't make sense to us how our money is being spent and maladministered right now. So there's a lot of work to do. I don't think we've learnt, and that is the sad thing. So we need to put in place oversight on Parliament, which is a report that we're working on an annual basis, and we really need to ensure that their performance on holding the executive to account has increased.
Sure. What was also really the spotlight, Sandile, Swana, was the strength of our institutions, right? I mean, do these bodies work the way they should? Are we able to test that And if so, what is the outcome of that particular position? I wonder what your reflections insofar as that is concerned is.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to add quickly that just for the sake of comparison, the price of Jacob Zuma's security upgrades was 246 million, Mbeki was 12 million, Mandela was 32 million. I think we need to keep that in mind as we talk about this. Now, one of the reasons why I said this thing, we must not let it go, is exactly related to your question, that the whole problem that we have about the Nkandla Gate and the many others that have been mentioned here by my colleagues is that it attacks the integrity of our institutions. I cannot tell you why since 2021 the case of Minenhle Makanya has not been finalized today. The ramifications of collecting money from VBS Bank, using it to pay for that debt of Jacob Zuma, in the process collapsing the whole bank, there should be ramifications around that. I don't see any ramification. So the NPA, whether it's called the Tribunal for these economic crimes, and all other institutions, including the Hawks, the police, and so on, are continually being compromised to protect these elites. And we, as the citizens and the political parties, need to actually insist that those institutions must be reinstated, they must be strengthened, and they must work properly and effectively against the upper class, against the fat cats who try to hijack this country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, they say one way to ensure that you don't repeat history is that you must introspect on what has been done, and there was never going to be enough time. The court proceedings that I alluded to earlier on are underway, so I have to thank you for your insight. Sandile, Swana, Themba Godi, and Duvenage, thanks very much indeed for speaking to us, and I imagine the reflections around this are set to continue.